Ethan Kohl sat in the clinic's waiting room, scrolling through his phone with the kind of bored detachment that came from a Tuesday afternoon that felt like every other Tuesday afternoon. The sterile scent of antiseptic and something faintly floral hung in the air, standard medical office fare. He adjusted the thin paper gown around his shoulders, the crinkle of it loud in the otherwise quiet space, and tried not to think about how much he'd rather be at his desk finishing the quarterly reports that had been haunting him for weeks. 28 years old, senior financial analyst at a mid-size firm in downtown Manhattan, and Ethan prided himself on being the picture of mundane responsibility. He went to work, he went to the gym, he went home to his tiny but well-organized apartment, and he repeated the cycle with the kind of regularity that made his mother worry he'd never find a mate. Not that he was looking. After his last relationship ended in spectacular, soul-crushing fashion 2 years ago, Ethan had decided that his life was perfectly fine without the complication of an alpha in it. He was an omega, yes, but a modern one. He took his suppressants like clockwork, wore scent-blocking patches religiously, and had built a career that didn't require him to ever explain his secondary gender to anyone. It was a quiet life. A safe life. The nurse had said it would be a quick blood draw and perhaps a flu shot. Ethan had nodded, barely looking up from his phone. He felt the familiar pinch of the needle in his arm, the cold swab of alcohol, the small talk about the unseasonably warm weather. Nothing unusual. Then the nurse stepped out, murmuring something about retrieving additional samples. Ethan didn't think much of it. Standard lab work, probably. He'd had routine physicals before. A different staff member returned, a harried-looking beta woman with a tray of vials and a syringe already loaded with a clear liquid. She moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "This won't take long," she said, motioning for Ethan to lie back on the examination table. Ethan's brow furrowed. "Additional samples?" "I'm sorry, what is that for?" The woman barely met his eyes, already checking a chart. "Just procedure." Before Ethan could object, the woman gently but firmly secured his wrist and administered the injection into his arm. It was oddly quick, left a strange warmth spreading through his veins that he chalked up to anxiety, and then she was gone, bustling out of the room with hardly a backward glance. Ethan blinked at the closed door, a vague sense of unease settling in his stomach. But the minutes ticked by in silence, and he convinced himself he was overthinking. Maybe it was some new vitamin booster they were trialing. Clinics occasionally offered experimental treatments, right? It was fine. Everything was fine. By the time the doctor finally came in for the actual exam, Ethan had almost forgotten the odd injection. The rest of the appointment proceeded normally: blood pressure, a quick chat about exercise, the routine physical. The doctor didn't mention anything unusual. With a clean bill of health and an adhesive bandage on his arm where the blood had been drawn, Ethan left the clinic, relieved that his busy day could continue. He had no inkling that fate had already altered its course within those sterile white walls. 2 weeks later, life taught Ethan just how fragile normal could be. It started with an inexplicable wave of nausea on his morning commute. He chalked it up to the jostling subway car, the smell of someone's greasy breakfast sandwich, the general unpleasantness of rush hour. But the next day brought another wave, this time triggered by the smell of his usual coffee, which had always been his comfort ritual. By the third morning, when simply brushing his teeth triggered a violent gagging reflex, a seed of worry planted itself in his mind. It couldn't be. Could it? Ethan's hands shook as he counted backward on the calendar. His last heat, he always tracked them meticulously, even with suppressants, had been, he did the math again. It was possible. It was technically possible if his suppressants had failed and he hadn't noticed, but he'd been so careful, so diligent. He hadn't been with anyone in nearly a year, since the disaster with Marcus that had left him emotionally gutted and swearing off alphas entirely. There was simply no chance he could be pregnant. Not in the usual way. But the nausea wasn't going away, and a strange tenderness in his chest had him Googling early pregnancy symptoms at his desk between spreadsheets. The test was just a formality, he told himself. Just to rule it out before calling a doctor about some kind of stomach bug. That evening, he slipped into a pharmacy with his heart pounding and bought a pregnancy test. The cashier, a bored-looking teenager, didn't even glance at him. Ethan tucked the box into his bag and walked home with the kind of forced calm that preceded a complete breakdown. In the privacy of his tiny bathroom, Ethan followed the instructions with trembling hands. 5 agonizing minutes later, he stared in disbelief at the result. 2 pink lines. Positive. He blinked once, twice, as if the result might change. His knees buckled, and he sat heavily on the cool tile floor, the test clutched in his hand. No, he breathed. That's impossible. A mix of shock and alarm thundered in his chest, his pulse roaring in his ears. He tore open the second test from the box, barely registering the tear slipping down his cheek. This must be a mistake. It had to be. The second test confirmed the first. Pregnant. Ethan pressed a palm to his still flat stomach, his breath coming fast and shallow. He lived alone, worked long hours, spent weekends curled up with books or getting brunch with his best friend Mia. There were no romantic entanglements, no drunken one-night stands tucked into forgotten memories. And yet, the proof was undeniable, staring up at him from the little plastic stick. If this was true, and it certainly seemed to be, then how? Questions whipped through him. Could the tests be faulty? Could he be sick with something that caused false positives? He thought of the routine checkup, the inexplicable extra injection that day. A memory surfaced, that rushed nurse, the mysterious syringe, and his heart skipped. No. Could that incident be connected? Grabbing his phone with shaking fingers, Ethan dialed the clinic's number. It was after hours, so he left a desperate message on the answering machine. This is Ethan Kohl. I need to speak with Dr. Patterson right away. It's urgent. Please. By the time he hung up, hot tears of frustration and fear blurred his vision. He sank onto his sofa, wrapped in a blanket of unreality, and tried to make sense of the senseless. The clinic returned his call first thing the next morning, summoning him to discuss some test results. Ethan didn't even wait to change out of his wrinkled clothes from the sleepless night before. Within an hour, he was sitting across from Dr. Patterson in his office, heart hammering as he demanded answers. I took 2 pregnancy tests, Ethan blurted, his voice trembling on the edge of hysteria. And they were positive. I haven't, there must be some mistake. Dr. Patterson, a normally jovial beta in his late 50s, looked unusually grave. He folded his hands on the desk and nodded slowly. Ethan, please know that we are investigating something very serious. You're right. There was a mistake. Hearing the word mistake made Ethan's stomach clench. The doctor continued carefully. It appears there was a procedural error during your last visit. Another patient was meant to receive a treatment, and you were inadvertently given it instead. Ethan's eyes widened, dread creeping up his spine. What kind of treatment, he asked, though he already sensed the answer. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat, unable to meet Ethan's eyes. An artificial insemination procedure. The room tilted around Ethan. Artificial insemination. The syringe. The additional samples. It all clicked horrifically into place. They had impregnated him by mistake during what should have been a simple checkup. He felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. Oh my God, Ethan whispered, fingers digging into the arms of his chair. His mind flashed through a reel of life-altering images, a baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound. A child he never planned or asked for. Anger flared white-hot behind his ribs, mingling with the panic. How could this happen? he cried, voice breaking. How could you possibly? I'm so sorry, Ethan, Dr. Patterson said quietly, genuinely pained. We traced the error as soon as the intended patient reported not conceiving. We were about to reach out to you. The samples were mislabeled, and you were given the wrong injection. It's an error that should never happen. He kept talking, explaining how an investigation was underway, how the clinic's director wanted to speak with him, how of course all medical expenses would be covered. But Ethan only half heard him. One phrase echoed in his mind with sickening clarity. Intended patient. Intended sample. He suddenly realized there was another side to this equation. The father, he managed to ask, his throat dry. Whose sample was it? At that, Dr. Patterson looked even more uncomfortable. I'm afraid I can't release the patient's identity without consent. That's protected information. Ethan's temper snapped. Protected information? You've injected me with a stranger's DNA without my consent, and you're worried about his privacy? He stood up so fast the chair screeched against the tile. Never in his life had he felt such a storm of violation and fury. His life, his body, had been upended by gross negligence, and now they expected him to accept a faceless explanation. I want to speak to whoever's in charge. Now, he demanded, hands clenched at his sides. The meeting that followed, held in a larger conference room, felt surreal. The clinic's administrator, a silver-haired beta woman with a crisp suit and a contrite smile, apologized profusely. Lawyers were mentioned. Confidentiality agreements slid across the table. Ethan barely touched the glass of water someone had placed in front of him, too focused on the file that lay closed in the administrator's hands. In it, he assumed, was information about the father. The alpha whose sperm now resided in his body, forming the cells of a child. He felt queasy all over again. Mr. Kohl, we know this is a lot to process, the administrator said gently. I want you to know that the alpha whose donation was used has been notified of the situation. Ethan's breath caught. They've told him. He hadn't expected that so soon. A spike of anxiety shot through him. What does he couldn't even form the sentence. Does he want the baby? Is he going to come after me? The administrator gave a tight smile meant to reassure. He has been very cooperative so far. He just wants to ensure that the situation is handled properly for everyone involved. Ethan frowned, not entirely comforted. Properly. What did properly mean to a stranger who had never intended him to carry his child? A fresh wave of worry rolled through him, and he wrapped protective arms around his middle. As the meeting concluded, Ethan was left with a stack of documents to review, offers of counseling, assurances that the clinic would support his decision whether to continue the pregnancy or not, and a proposed settlement agreement complete with a substantial sum of money if he agreed not to pursue legal action. It all felt cold and transactional. He shoved the paperwork into his bag, stomach churning. One fact burned in his awareness: the father knew. He had no name, no face to attach to that title. But somewhere out there, an alpha had received a phone call that his genetic material had been mistakenly given to an unsuspecting omega. How would he react? Was he furious? Horrified? Would he prefer Ethan terminate the pregnancy? The thought made Ethan instinctively cradle his abdomen. Despite the shock and anger, he realized he already felt a fierce protectiveness for the life inside him, a life created without his intent, yes, but innocent of the circumstances. In just a day, the abstract idea of pregnancy had solidified into something achingly real. His baby. However it had come to be. That evening, Ethan curled up on his couch, the city lights blinking outside his window, and tried to quiet his mind. He didn't know what to do next. His phone buzzed with a text from Mia, asking about their weekend plans. Ethan bit his lip, hesitation paralyzing him. He hadn't told a soul what was happening. How could he possibly explain this nightmare? For now, he texted back something about needing to postpone, citing a work emergency. When he finally drifted to sleep in the early hours, Ethan dreamed of syringes and nameless faces, of reaching out for help and finding nothing but blurred outlines. He woke with his cheeks damp and his heart heavy. Everything had changed in an instant, and he was utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. Little did Ethan know, the storm had only begun. Far across the city, the other half of this impossible equation was already in motion, a dangerous force of nature whose life, too, was about to veer irrevocably off course. Halfway across Manhattan, in a penthouse office atop one of the city's most exclusive high-rises, Alessandro Moretti ended a call and set his phone down with a deliberate calm that belied the turmoil inside him. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, dusk was deepening over the skyline, casting long shadows into the luxurious space. Alex's broad shoulders were tense beneath his tailored suit jacket, and his dark, storm-gray eyes stared unseeing at the sleek mahogany desk. He replayed the conversation in his mind, each word like a puzzle piece clicking into place, a puzzle that made less sense the more he considered it. There's been an incident at the Ash Grove fertility clinic, his personal attorney had informed him minutes ago. Your stored sample was used. Mistakenly. An omega has been impregnated. Alex had gone very still at those words, a rare shock rendering him speechless. At first, he thought he'd misheard. But the lawyer's apologetic tone and the flurry of details that followed confirmed it, a mix-up, an unwitting omega, and a child. His child. If the science held true. Alex's mind flashed to the reason that sample existed at all. 2 years ago, under pressure from his aging father and the board of the Moretti family enterprises, Alex had begun considering the need for an heir. Not just for the business, but for the legacy of a family that had built an empire at the edge of the law for generations. Coldly pragmatic by nature, Alex had frozen his sperm as a precaution before a dangerous operation against a rival syndicate, unsure if he'd emerge alive. It was supposed to be an insurance policy for the future, one he never expected to cash in unless he found a suitable partner or chose a surrogate under carefully controlled conditions. Certainly not like this, with a stranger becoming the unwitting carrier of his heir without his knowledge or consent. He rose from his leather chair, restlessness coursing through him, and walked to the window. Far below, the city streets gleamed, alive with countless stories. Alex's reflection looked back at him, tall, dark-haired, his face composed in an unreadable mask perfected over years of cutthroat negotiations and dangerous encounters. But behind that mask, his thoughts churned. A child. My child. The idea was at once startling and strangely magnetic. He imagined a small life carrying his blood, imagined holding an infant that was part of him, a vision that tugged at something deep in his chest he hadn't realized was there. Yet entangled with that nascent curiosity was a surge of protectiveness and anger. This shouldn't have happened without his consent. The clinic's error had potentially endangered an omega and an unborn baby, his baby. Alex ruled his world by maintaining control at all times. Now control had been wrested from him in the most intimate way. He thought of the omega, Ethan, the lawyer had said his name was. The file with his information sat on Alex's desk, delivered via secure courier moments after the call. Alex's jaw tightened. What must he be feeling? Confusion, certainly. Maybe terror if he realized who Alex was. The lawyer indicated Ethan hadn't been told his identity yet, confidentiality laws prevented that without Alex's permission. But Alex knew it was only a matter of time. He had agreed to a meeting tomorrow at the clinic, a meeting with Ethan, facilitated by attorneys. The clinic wanted to smooth things over, avoid a scandal or lawsuit. They clearly hoped money would resolve it. Alex scoffed under his breath. Money was the least of his concerns. He had more wealth than he could spend in 100 lifetimes. No, his demands would be very different. If this Omega truly carried his child, there was no way Alex would remain a distant third party. He would claim responsibility and ensure the safety and future of his offspring. His gaze hardened as he considered the many implications. Alex's world was not a safe one, at least not for outsiders. As head of the Moretti crime family, he had clawed his way to the throne after his father's semi-retirement, solidifying power through equal parts business acumen and fear. That power kept him and those under his protection safe, but it also painted a target on all he held dear. If rivals got wind that Alex Moretti had an heir on the way, he clenched his fists, quelling the surge of concern. He'd eliminate any threat before it got close. The thought was as cold as steel, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Turning away from the window, Alex strode back to his desk and opened the file on Ethan Kohl. A photo clipped to the first page drew his attention, a candid shot of a young man with honey-brown hair and wary hazel eyes, caught in the middle of a hesitant smile. Alex found himself lingering on that image. There was a gentleness in his expression, an innocence. He looked utterly ordinary in the best way, like someone who led a life far removed from violence and power plays. A life Alex had never had. He scanned Ethan's background, 28 years old, New Jersey native, senior financial analyst at a mid-size firm. No criminal record. No known ties to any of Alex's enemies. He had family, a mother in a nursing home upstate, a younger brother in college. No mention of a current partner. Notes from a preliminary PI sweep hinted he'd broken off an engagement over a year ago. Alex felt a slight easing of tension in his chest at that detail, though he wouldn't examine why. As he closed the file, Alex's resolve sharpened. Ethan would undoubtedly have misgivings about him, if not now, then once he learned who Alex was. Convincing a stranger to cooperate in something as life-altering as raising a child together would be daunting for anyone, much less when that stranger was a mafia boss with blood on his hands. Alex's reputation preceded him like a dark shadow. To the public, he was a reclusive luxury real estate investor, but in the underworld, he was known as a man who brokered no insult or betrayal without retribution. If Ethan looked him up, which he likely would, he'd find whispers of those rumors. Alex inhaled slowly, controlling the flare of frustration. It didn't matter whether Ethan feared him or not. He would not walk away from this. The Omega and the baby would have his protection, and with time, Alex would make him see reason. They are mine to protect now. The thought was stark, possessive, and surprisingly comforting. That night, Alex barely slept. Instead, he planned. By the time dawn crept over the city, he had mobilized his most trusted lieutenant to discreetly increase security around the fertility clinic and around Mr. Kohl's neighborhood. No harm would come to the Omega or the baby, not from his enemies, and not from any panic-driven choices. He also arranged for a private physician specializing in obstetrics to be on standby. He didn't trust the clinic any further than he could throw them after this debacle. When his driver pulled up to the clinic the next morning, Alex stepped out into a crisp autumn sun. He adjusted his suit jacket and squared his shoulders. The establishment had cleared its schedule for this clandestine meeting, and he was escorted through hushed corridors to a conference room. Alex could sense the fear rippling off the clinic administrators as they greeted him. They knew exactly who they were dealing with, even if they didn't dare say it. He responded with curt nods, his focus laser-sharp on the door through which Ethan would soon walk. The Omega arrived a few minutes later, preceded by the murmur of a lawyer's voice. When he stepped into the room, Alex felt a curious jolt in his chest, recognition, perhaps, from studying his photos so intently, but also something more visceral. Ethan paused just inside the doorway, his eyes flickering over the assembled suits until they landed on Alex. His hazel gaze locked with Alex's, and in that instant, the world around them seemed to fall away. Ethan's face went pale. He clearly knew who Alex was, whether by instinct or research. The realization was written in his widening eyes. Alex saw his throat bob as he swallowed hard, pushing his back against the doorframe as if he might bolt. Alex rose slowly from his seat, one hand unconsciously reaching toward him in a calming gesture. "Mr. Kohl," he said, his deep voice gentle but firm. "Thank you for coming. I'm Alessandro Moretti." Silence stretched taut in the room. The clinic's lawyer motioned to a chair for Ethan, but he remained rooted in place. Alex could practically feel the panic rolling off him, a sharp, acrid scent beneath whatever suppressants and blockers the Omega was using. It stirred a pang of regret in him. I don't want his fear, he thought, surprisingly troubled by it. This Omega is carrying my child. The protective urge surged again, stronger now, seeing him in person. Ethan was lean, maybe half a foot shorter than Alex, dressed in a conservative button-down and slacks that hung a bit loose, no doubt from stress. A few strands of wavy brown hair had escaped his ponytail to frame a delicate face that currently held an expression of sheer overwhelm. At last, Ethan inhaled shakily and moved to the table, sitting as far from Alex as possible. The lawyers began talking, their practiced spiels about resolution and amicable agreement droning in the background. Alex watched Ethan instead. He kept his eyes fixed on a spot on the polished table, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Alex noticed how those hands trembled, and how Ethan tucked them under the table to hide it. A strange urge gripped Alex. He wanted to reach out and still those hands, to reassure him that he meant no harm. But he held back, sensing Ethan might shatter like glass if he moved too quickly. Finally, when the legal representatives paused to await a response, Alex spoke directly to him. "Ethan," he said, the taste of the Omega's name unfamiliar but not unpleasant on his tongue. "I know this is overwhelming. I'm as surprised as you are about what happened." He kept his tone measured, tempering his naturally authoritative demeanor. "But I want you to know one thing, I will take responsibility. I will ensure you and the baby are cared for." At that, Ethan's eyes snapped up to meet his, a spark of defiance breaking through the fear. "Cared for," he echoed, voice unsteady. "Mr. Moretti, I don't even know you. And I certainly never asked for any of this." He made a vague gesture toward his abdomen. Alex inclined his head. "Nor did I," he agreed, choosing honesty. "But it's happened. We have to decide what to do going forward." Ethan bit his lip, and Alex noticed it had a way of trembling when he was upset. "What I do going forward is my choice," Ethan said, quieter but firm. "This is my body. My life. I'm still wrapping my head around even having a baby." His voice nearly cracked on that word, but he steadied. "I came to hear what you had to say. But if you think you can just snap your fingers and dictate how this goes." He didn't finish, but the warning was implicit. Alex felt a flicker of admiration despite the circumstances. Ethan might be terrified, but he had courage. "I'm not here to dictate," Alex said carefully. "I'm here to offer my support and protection. As the father, I have a stake in this child's well-being too. I think we both want what's best for." He hesitated, realizing he was about to say, "our child." That phrasing might be too presumptive for Ethan right now. "For the baby," he finished. Ethan's brows drew together. "Protection? From what?" he asked warily. Alex exchanged a glance with his lawyer, who subtly shook his head. They had decided not to divulge too much about the dangers of Alex's world to him yet, no need to compound his fear. But Ethan was perceptive, his gaze shifted between the suited men flanking Alex and the way they deferred to him. He knew enough to be wary. "Mr. Moretti deals in high-level business," the clinic's administrator interjected delicately. "He merely means financial security and access to top medical care." "Of course. The woman smiled too brightly. Alex had to resist rolling his eyes. Ethan wasn't fooled. His eyes came back to Alex's, searching. Alex held his gaze steadily. "I mean that I can keep you safe," he said softly, deciding on partial truth. "You and the baby will want for nothing. I have resources, connections. If you need prenatal specialists, they're yours. If you want security to ensure privacy, it's done." Ethan's throat worked. "And what do you expect in return?" he asked. There it was. The catch. Alex leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled. "Only to be part of the child's life," he replied. "And to keep you both safe. We can work out details, visitation, custody, whatever legal frameworks you're comfortable with. But I won't walk away from my own flesh and blood, Mr. Kohl." At that, some intensity must have seeped into his voice despite his attempt to remain gentle, because Ethan flinched. His composure wavered. He closed his eyes for a moment, a few tears escaping despite his obvious attempt to hold them back. "This is so much," he whispered, voice thick. "Just a week ago, I was just me. I had my quiet little life. And now," he opened his eyes again, and they glistened with emotion. "Now I have a crime lord offering me protection like I'm some helpless character in a gangster movie." There was a faint edge of dark humor in his tone, or maybe it was despair. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably at Ethan's frank description of Alex, but Alex let out a soft exhale. "I understand how absurd it seems," he said. "I won't force anything on you, Ethan." Hearing himself use the Omega's first name, he noticed a subtle softening in Ethan's guarded expression. "But please, at least consider my help. The city can be dangerous, even for someone without my affiliations. Paparazzi, extortionists, once this gets out, you could be targeted. I can prevent that." Ethan's brow furrowed as he absorbed Alex's words. The mention of publicity struck a chord. He hadn't even considered that yet. Would the story leak? A medical scandal like this could easily hit the news, and if Alessandro Moretti's name was attached. Ethan suddenly saw a vision of reporters swarming him, flashing cameras as he tried to hide a growing belly. His free hand fell protectively over his abdomen once more, almost an unconscious gesture. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked at last, exhaustion and resignation warring in his voice. "That I go into hiding under your watch? That I become, what, your responsibility?" The word responsibility dripped with distaste, and Alex couldn't fault him for it. He exchanged a quick look with his counsel before responding. "I have a secure estate outside the city," he said calmly. "If you were willing, you could stay there for some or all of the pregnancy. You'd have privacy, staff at your disposal, medical care. If not that, I can at least place security details near you here in Manhattan. Whatever level of support you accept, I will provide." Ethan stared at him as if seeing a stranger, which of course he was. He didn't answer immediately, instead lowering his gaze to the table. In the tense silence, Alex's heart did something unexpected. It squeezed with empathy. He tried to imagine how he would feel if he were in Ethan's position, an average person confronted with an extraordinary situation and an infamous stranger claiming a stake in his life. He realized it would be terrifying. And Ethan, for all his brave front, was clearly overwhelmed. The meeting wound down with no firm conclusions. Ethan was given a copy of the proposed agreement to review at his leisure, clauses about cooperation and confidentiality, plus generous financial compensation. Alex emphasized one last time that Ethan could call him directly if he had any questions or needs, sliding a sleek black card with his personal cell number across the table. "Any time, day or night," he said, catching Ethan's gaze. "I mean that." Ethan only nodded, hesitating before taking the card like it might burn him. As everyone stood to leave, a strange impulse gripped Alex. He extended his hand, a formal yet earnest gesture. "It truly is a pleasure to meet you, Ethan," he said quietly. "I wish it were under different circumstances. But I'm determined to make the best of this. I hope you'll see that." Ethan looked at his offered hand, then up at him. After a beat, he reached out and shook it. Alex felt the coolness of his slender hand in his own warm grasp. Ethan trembled just a little, but he met Alex's eyes with a glimmer of his earlier defiance. "I'll think about everything," Ethan replied, voice soft but clear. "That's the best I can promise right now." Alex inclined his head. "That's fair." Reluctantly, he released Ethan's hand. The Omega turned and left, flanked by his own legal counsel, his posture stiff and uncertain. Alex watched the door close behind him, resisting the urge to follow. In that moment, Alex realized he already felt an undeniable pull toward this brave, frightened Omega. Ethan was carrying his child, that alone forged a powerful bond in Alex's eyes. But beyond that, there was something about the way he had stood his ground that stirred him. He had the urge to shelter Ethan, yes, but also an unexpected desire to know him. His lawyer cleared his throat, jarring Alex from his thoughts. "We'll proceed as discussed, sir." Alex nodded, already striding out with purpose. He would give Ethan a little time, as he'd requested, but not too much. Until the Omega made his decision, Alex would keep a careful watch from afar. Ethan might have left the meeting unconvinced, perhaps intent on returning to his quiet little life. What Ethan didn't fully grasp, however, was that his life was no longer quiet or little. It was entwined with Alex's now, whether he welcomed it or not. And Alessandro Moretti protected what was his with ruthless devotion. That protection would be needed sooner than either of them expected. Ethan shut the door of his apartment and immediately sagged back against it, shutting his eyes. His heart was pounding as if he'd sprinted miles, though it had been only a short cab ride from the clinic. Alessandro Moretti. He whispered the name in his mind, and a shiver danced over his skin. In the conference room, Alex had emanated power, not just the wealth and confidence of a successful businessman, but something more dangerous. Even in his gentlest tone, there was an edge of command. The way others deferred to him, the way his icy gray eyes observed every detail, it both unsettled and, in a strange way, reassured Ethan. Because underlying that danger, he had sensed a genuine resolve to safeguard him and the baby. Ethan exhaled shakily and opened his eyes. His apartment looked exactly as he'd left it that morning, cozy, lived in, a pile of mail on the console table, a blanket tossed over the arm of the couch. But he felt like an intruder in his own home now. Everything had changed. With numb fingers, he pulled out his phone and did what he'd been resisting until now, he Googled Alessandro Moretti. As expected, a slew of results came up, society page photos of a forbiddingly handsome alpha at charity galas, articles about his luxury hotel ventures, and then the murkier things, speculative pieces linking him to organized crime, whispers of violence cloaked in business jargon. Reputed Mafia scion, alleged ties to underworld, too powerful to touch. Ethan's stomach tightened reading the words. He tossed the phone aside, running his hands through his hair. How was this real? He felt like the hero of some dark thriller, not Ethan Kohl, steady CPA and average nobody. A cynical laugh bubbled up before he could stop it. He glanced down at his flat midsection. "Baby," he murmured aloud. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. The remainder of the day passed in a fog. Ethan tried to work from home, spreadsheets and tax forms he'd brought with him, but concentration was impossible. By evening, he realized he needed to get out of his own head for a bit. He decided to go to the one place that always calmed him, the bookstore a few blocks away where he often spent his free time. Pulling on a light jacket, Ethan stepped out into the brisk air. Dusk had fallen, and the city hummed with its usual energy, cars honking, people bustling past with coffees and briefcases. To his jumpy nerves, everything felt like it was in hyperfocus. The chatter of two women passing behind him made him startle. A delivery truck backfiring at the corner made his heart leap. Get a grip, he scolded himself. Not every sound is a threat. Yet as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Halfway down the block, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. Nothing obvious, just a man in a pea coat checking his watch, a couple walking arm in arm. Ethan bit his lip. Was he being paranoid? Or had Alex already deployed his promised security to shadow him? He wouldn't put it past the alpha. The thought that unseen eyes might be tracking his movements was both creepy and oddly comforting. If they were Alex's people, at least any other ill-meaning stranger might be deterred. At the bookstore, Ethan wandered the aisles aimlessly. Usually the smell of ink and paper soothed him, but tonight his mind refused to quiet. He replayed the meeting over and over, Alex's deep voice saying, "I will take responsibility," the way he'd looked at Ethan, steady and unblinking, when he said he wouldn't walk away from his child. A part of Ethan, one he hardly dared acknowledge, felt a glimmer of something like gratitude. His own father had walked away from his family when Ethan was a toddler, vanishing from their lives. He grew up watching his Omega mother struggle to raise two kids alone. The scars of that abandonment ran deep. And here was an alpha, a dangerous, powerful alpha, who could have easily signed a hush agreement and sent him off with a check, but instead wanted involvement. It was overwhelming, yes, but also strangely honorable in its own way. Ethan caught himself absent-mindedly running a hand over a book's spine while lost in thought. Did he dare trust that Alex's intentions were good? The alpha might insist on being part of the baby's life, but what did that mean? Occasional visits? Co-parenting? Did he expect Ethan to move into his mansion and play house? The uncertainty was gnawing. A sudden crash jolted him out of his reverie. Ethan peeked around the bookshelf to see that a display near the entrance had toppled, scattering books everywhere. A couple of staff members rushed to clean it up, apologizing to a customer who stood nearby. The customer, a tall, stocky beta with a baseball cap, waved it off. But as he turned, his eyes flickered around the store with an alertness that seemed out of place for someone who'd just knocked over a pile of novels. Ethan felt a prickle of unease when the beta's gaze skated past him. He stepped back behind the shelf, his heart now thumping faster. Something about the man, he couldn't say what, but an instinct told him to be careful. Checking out a book could wait. He decided to leave. Perhaps his nerves were in overdrive, but all he wanted was the safety of his apartment again. As Ethan exited the bookstore, he glanced around surreptitiously for the man in the cap. He was nowhere to be seen. Pulling his jacket tighter, Ethan quickened his pace down the street. The sooner he got home, the better. Lamps on the sidewalk had just flickered on, pools of golden light guiding his way. Just half a block more to his building, he could see the familiar green awning. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind him, brisk and heavy. Before he could react, a large hand clamped on his upper arm. "Don't make a sound," a rough voice hissed in his ear, sending a bolt of terror through Ethan. His mind flashed to the self-defense classes Mia had dragged him to last year. Stall. Assess. His pulse skyrocketed. He was being grabbed on a public street. How? Why? He hadn't even processed who it was, the baseball cap man? Someone else? Adrenaline surging, Ethan instinctively tried to twist free, opening his mouth to scream. But the beta was ready. He yanked Ethan back against a solid chest and pressed something sharp against his ribs. A knife. Ethan froze, icy dread flooding his veins as he felt the tip through his shirt. Help, he managed to choke out a half-scream before fear closed his throat. It all happened in seconds. A dark sedan screeched to a halt at the curb just ahead, its back door flung open. The man began dragging Ethan toward it. He dug his heels in, struggling wildly despite the blade. "Let go of me," he cried, panic making his voice high. He thought of the tiny life inside him, and a fierce desperation took hold. He couldn't let them take him. Using every ounce of will, Ethan threw his body weight to the side, off-balancing his assailant for a precious heartbeat. That was when chaos erupted. From seemingly out of nowhere, two figures in black barreled into them. Ethan felt the whoosh of air as one man tackled his attacker with brutal force, sending the knife skittering across the sidewalk. Another man, leaner, with a swift grace, shoved Ethan aside out of the melee. He stumbled to the ground, breath coming in ragged gasps, and watched in shock as a flurry of fists and kicks disabled his would-be kidnapper in mere moments. The man in the cap hit the pavement, unconscious or close to it, blood trickling from a split eyebrow. Before Ethan could process anything further, the lean man who had pushed him clear knelt at his side. "Mr. Kohl, are you hurt?" he asked urgently. Ethan stared at him. He looked to be in his 30s, athletic, with a coiled readiness in his stance. His eyes, sharp and brown, scanned Ethan for injuries. Ethan realized he knew his name. The pieces clicked. Alex's security. He had been watching after all. And thank God. I'm okay, Ethan stammered, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. Everything was still a blur of adrenaline. His arm throbbed where he'd been grabbed, and fear aftershocks trembled through his limbs. The baby, he hadn't fallen hard, just onto his hands and knees, but terror gripped him anew thinking something could have happened. I'm pregnant, he managed to say to the man, one hand instinctively moving to his belly. Please. The security man nodded briskly. We know. Let's get you out of here. The situation is contained. As he helped Ethan up, Ethan saw the other guard zip-tie the wrists of the downed attacker and speak into a headset, likely calling for backup or a cleanup crew. It struck Ethan as absurd and horrifying that such clandestine violence and response could occur in plain view yet unnoticed by the public. But that was New York. A couple of onlookers across the street were gaping, but one of Alex's men flashed a badge and they quickly moved on, likely mistaking them for police. The guard guided Ethan firmly toward a black SUV that had now pulled up to the curb. His knees wobbled, but he let himself be led. There was safety with these men, he felt that now in his bones. Once he was settled in the back seat, the two men swiftly joined him, one in the driver's seat, the other beside him. The locks clicked shut with a heavy thunk. Ethan exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Safe for the moment. The SUV sped off, and for the first time, Ethan got a clear look at the man next to him, the one who had first come to his aid. He must have noticed Ethan's scrutiny because he gave a faint smile. Marco Spinelli, he introduced himself. I work for Mr. Moretti. Ethan let out a shaky laugh. Of course you do, he said, voice quivering. He said he'd protect me. I guess I didn't realize he meant literally around the clock. Marco's expression was unapologetic. With all due respect, sir, after this incident, I'm glad we were watching. You should be too. Ethan sobered, pressing a hand against his temple as a dull ache formed. I am, he whispered. I don't even know who that was. The driver, a burly alpha with close-cropped hair, spoke up. Viktor Petrov's crew, he said grimly, eyes on the road. We recognize the guy, he's muscle for the Petrov Bratva. Ethan blinked, not understanding. Marco clarified, Russian mob. Petrov likely caught wind of the situation at the clinic. This was an attempt to grab leverage over Mr. Moretti. He paused, glancing at Ethan meaningfully. You and the baby are that leverage. The bottom fell out of Ethan's stomach. He had suspected Alex's talk of danger might be more than paranoia, but hearing it spelled out was chilling. In a flash, he saw how naive he'd been, thinking he could just go to a bookstore, live normally, while carrying the child of a mafia boss. He was a target now. The reality crashed over him. By sheer accident of fate, he and his unborn baby were pieces on a deadly chessboard. His hands started to tremble anew, and tears of shock pricked his eyes. "It's okay," Marco said quietly, perhaps noticing his reaction. "You're safe now. We're taking you to Mr. Moretti." At that, a different kind of shiver coursed through Ethan, a mixture of relief and apprehension. Alex. He would see him again tonight, apparently. And after this, how could he refuse whatever the Alpha asked? Alex had essentially saved his life, saved his baby's life. The thought made his chest tighten with emotion. Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. He pictured Alex's face in the conference room, how intense yet controlled he had been. Under that polished control, Ethan now sensed a ferocity. The world Alex lived in was ruthless. And now, because of the clinic's mistake, Ethan's world had collided with his. The only consolation was that Alex seemed intent on keeping him safe. And thus far, he'd proven he could. After a short, tense drive, the SUV entered a private underground garage beneath an upscale apartment tower. Ethan barely registered the elegant lobby they whisked him through or the quiet elevator ride up to the penthouse floor. His mind was still replaying the attack in terrifying loops, the vice-like grip on his arm, the glint of the knife, the heart-stopping moment of trying to scream. He realized belatedly that he hadn't contacted his family or Mia. They'd have no idea he'd been in trouble or that he'd disappeared. In his bag, his phone buzzed, likely Mia now, worried since Ethan had ignored earlier messages. Before he could reach for it, the elevator doors opened directly into a stunning foyer of a penthouse. Warm light bathed marble floors, and modern art hung on textured walls. It was the epitome of luxury and security, clearly Alex's domain. Marco gently touched his elbow. "Come. Let's get you comfortable. The boss is on his way." They guided him into a spacious living area where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering night skyline. The room was tastefully furnished with Italian leather and dark wood, but Ethan barely took it in. He sank onto a sofa, exhaustion and shock catching up. The adrenaline crash made his limbs feel like lead. Marco disappeared briefly and returned with a glass of water, which Ethan accepted gratefully, sipping to soothe his dry throat. 1,000 thoughts jumbled in his mind. He knew one thing for certain now, he couldn't handle this alone. Not the threats, not the constant fear. Alex's earlier proposal for protection was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. He placed a hand over his abdomen and made a silent promise, "I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, little one. If that means leaning on Alessandro Moretti and entering his fortress, so be it." He didn't have to wait long. A door across the apartment opened, and Alex strode in like a tempest-given human form. Ethan stood instinctively as he approached. Alex's expression was a mix of barely contained fury and worry, a crack in his polished veneer that revealed the tempest underneath. "Ethan," he said, almost a sigh of relief upon seeing him upright and seemingly unharmed. Without hesitation, Alex closed the distance and, to Ethan's surprise, gently cupped his shoulders. His eyes roamed over Ethan as if checking for injury. "Dio mio," he murmured, a faint tremor in his deep voice. "I'm sorry. I never wanted you to be thrown into danger like this." The warmth of his hands through Ethan's thin jacket and the genuine concern in his gaze undid the last of Ethan's composure. "They tried to take me," Ethan whispered, voice trembling. Saying it aloud made it real all over again. "They knew about the baby, about me. If your men hadn't, his throat closed up, words failing. Alex's eyes darkened with anger at the thought. But they didn't succeed, he said firmly. You're safe here. I promise you, no one will harm you under my roof. There was such conviction, such protective ferocity in those words, that Ethan felt a sudden flood of safety wash over him. Before he knew it, he was collapsing against the alpha, the trauma spilling out in silent sobs against Alex's chest. Alex stiffened for a half-second, likely unaccustomed to people clutching him, but then one strong arm wrapped around Ethan's back, the other cradling his head. He held him securely as he shook, his hand stroking gently through Ethan's hair in a slow, comforting rhythm. Ethan felt the hard muscles of Alex's chest rise and fall as he breathed, a steady anchor in the storm of his emotions. It's okay, Alex murmured against his hair. You're okay now, Ethan. I've got you. Those simple phrases, I've got you, broke through his walls. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan truly let himself feel the fear and the relief. He clung to Alex's expensive suit jacket, fingers curled in the fabric, and let the tears come. The alpha simply held him, patient and solid, until the tide ebbed. When Ethan finally pulled back, sniffling and embarrassed by his outburst, Alex didn't let him retreat far. He kept his hands on Ethan's upper arms, scanning his face with care. Sit, Alex urged softly, guiding him back to the sofa. He knelt in front of him, eye level, which struck Ethan as something few men of Alex's stature would do. Tell me if you're hurt. Did he cut you? His gaze flickered to Ethan's abdomen. Is the baby? He didn't finish, but his unspoken question hung in the air. Ethan shook his head, wiping his cheeks. I think we're okay, he said. He held a knife, but I don't feel any wound. I fell down, but it wasn't hard. He placed his hand protectively on his stomach and added, almost in wonder, I think the baby's fine. Saying that aloud steadied him. Despite everything, the baby was safe inside him. Alex's posture relaxed a fraction. Good. A dangerous glint reignited in his eyes as he added, the man who tried this won't get a second chance. I'll see to that. The cold fury underneath his calm tone was unmistakable. Ethan shivered, not at Alex, but at remembering his attacker's voice and the feel of that knife. They said Petrov, Ethan whispered. Your men, that someone named Petrov was behind it. Alex nodded grimly. Viktor Petrov. He leads a Bratva cell that's been encroaching on our territory. We've had tensions, but nothing open. This is a declaration of war. He sighed, running a hand through his jet-black hair. For the first time, Ethan noticed Alex looked a bit tired around the edges, faint shadows under his eyes, maybe from sleepless worry. I'm sorry, Ethan said softly. Alex's eyes snapped to his in surprise. You're sorry? For what? Ethan swallowed. For all of this. If the clinic hadn't, he struggled for words. I'm dragging you into a mess too. Now you have another vulnerability to worry about. He gestured vaguely to himself, recalling Alex's earlier argument about danger. Alex made a low sound, something akin to a growl of disagreement. None of this is your fault. The blame lies with that clinic and now with Petrov. And trust me, his jaw set hard. I will rectify both. I've already had a very pointed conversation with the clinic's board about their security lapses. There was a fearsome glint in his eye that made Ethan almost pity those administrators. Almost. Alex continued, his voice gentler, as for Petrov, he will regret even thinking of you as a pawn. I'll deal with him soon enough. A silence fell. Ethan believed him. Alex spoke with such conviction that Ethan felt if he promised to hang the moon, he'd find a way. And while a part of Ethan was unsettled by the violence that swirled around him, Another part felt relief bordering on gratitude that someone so formidable was on his side. Alex glanced at Marco and the other guard, who had been waiting discreetly by the foyer. "Grazie, Marco. I'll talk with you and Sal later about tightening our net." The two men nodded and quietly departed, leaving Ethan and Alex alone in the spacious living room. With the immediate crisis past, a different kind of tension settled between them. Ethan realized he was still clutching Alex's forearm lightly, as if unwilling to break the physical reassurance. He flushed and withdrew his hand. "I suppose I should thank you," he said, offering a tentative smile. "I already did, but truly, Alex, if your men hadn't been there." Alex's expression softened at his use of his first name. "You don't need to thank me. Protecting you is my responsibility now." He paused, then added with a touch of self-reproach, "Though I should apologize. I underestimated how fast our enemies would learn of the situation. I thought we had more time." Ethan shook his head, a strand of his hair falling loose. "You warned me. I didn't really believe it until now." He managed a rueful chuckle. "I even tried to convince myself I could just carry on normally." His face fell. "That was foolish." "Not foolish," Alex said softly. "Hopeful. You didn't ask for any of this madness. It's only natural you wanted to cling to normalcy." The understanding in his tone made tears prick at Ethan's eyes again, but he blinked them back. Alex rose then, moving to sit beside him on the sofa rather than kneeling. "Ethan," he said, turning toward him. "I know tonight has been traumatic. But it reinforces what I was trying to tell you earlier. You and the baby need protection around the clock. I meant it when I offered my estate or any secure location of your choice. After this, would you please consider staying here? At least until we neutralize the immediate threat." Ethan looked around at the lavish penthouse, a far cry from his cozy one-bedroom. Staying here with Alex, it was daunting. Yet the thought of returning to his apartment alone and vulnerable was now out of the question. He nodded slowly. "Yes. I will stay. I'll do whatever is necessary to keep the baby safe." A flicker of relief crossed Alex's face, tension easing from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said, sounding sincere. "You won't regret it. I'll make sure you have everything you need and that you're comfortable." He stood and extended a hand to help Ethan up. "Come. Let me show you to a guest suite. You can rest, and I'll have some food sent up if you're hungry." Now that he mentioned it, Ethan realized he was starving. The shock had worn off enough for hunger to assert itself. "That would be nice," he admitted. He placed his hand in Alex's, allowing the alpha to pull him gently to his feet. The touch was brief but left his palm tingling. He felt suddenly self-conscious, his clothes dusty from the fall, his face surely blotchy from crying, yet Alex treated him as if he were a king being escorted in a palace, one hand lightly at the small of his back as he guided him down a hallway. Alex opened the door to a beautiful suite, a spacious bedroom with an adjoining sitting area and a balcony overlooking the city. The lights of Manhattan twinkled beyond the glass doors like fallen stars. The decor was elegant in soothing hues of cream and silver, clearly prepared with care. On the bed lay a few folded clothing items that Ethan suspected were for him, perhaps purchased in anticipation of his stay since he'd arrived with nothing but the clothes on his back. He approached the bed and realized the items included a soft-looking set of pajamas and toiletries on the nightstand. Ethan's throat tightened at this thoughtful provision. Alex anticipated everything. The weight of the evening's events pressed on him, and he suddenly longed for nothing more than a hot shower and to crawl under the covers. Alex lingered by the door, as if reluctant to leave him just yet. "My room is at the end of the hall if you need anything. Marco will be right outside this suite all night as well." He hesitated, then added, "Try to get some rest. I know it won't be easy after what happened, but you're safe here. I give you my word. Ethan met his gaze. Alex had done so much for him already, and despite the bizarre circumstances, Ethan did feel safe near him. I trust you, he found himself saying softly. Good night, Alex. A slight easing of the stern line of Alex's mouth indicated a smile. Good night, Ethan. He withdrew, gently closing the door behind him. The moment he was gone, Ethan sat heavily on the edge of the plush bed. Trust. He'd said he trusted Alex. And surprisingly, he realized it was true. In Alex's arms, he had felt a security he hadn't felt in years. It was too soon and too strange to label those feelings, but he was grateful beyond measure not to be alone in this anymore. He stood and began to undress, catching a glimpse of himself in a large mirror above a dresser. His reflection showed a young man whose life had been turned upside down, hair messy, eyes wide with residual fear, a faint bruise forming on his forearm where he'd been grabbed. But there was something else in his expression too, a hint of resilience. He was still standing. And now he had an unlikely ally. As he changed into the provided pajamas, soft cotton that fit well enough, Ethan wondered at how fate worked. Just days ago, Alessandro Moretti had been a name on a clinic file. Now he was so much more, a protector, the father of his child, an alpha who had held him as he cried and vowed to keep him safe. The situation was far from normal, far from the life he'd imagined. But despite the lingering fear, Ethan felt a spark of hope. Perhaps it was simply the relief of not facing this alone. A knock at the suite door startled him slightly. Mr. Kohl, came a muffled female voice. Room service. Ethan opened the door to find a kindly older beta woman in a chef's uniform wheeling in a cart bearing covered dishes. The savory aroma hit his nose, reminding him he was famished. Mr. Moretti asked me to bring you some dinner, dear, the woman said warmly. She set a tray on a small table by the window, soup, salad, and some toast. Gentle on the stomach. She gave Ethan a grandmotherly smile. Anything else I can get you? Ethan shook his head, touched by the thoughtfulness. Thank you so much. This is perfect. After the woman left, Ethan ate slowly, sitting and gazing out at the breathtaking view. The soup was a comforting tomato bisque, the salad crisp and fresh. With each bite, he felt some strength returning. Outside, New York glittered, oblivious to the dramas of its inhabitants. But here, in Alex's fortress in the sky, Ethan's life had irrevocably changed course. That night, after showering and crawling into the luxurious bed, Ethan expected to lie awake replaying the attack, and he did for a short while, his heart stuttering at the dark memory. But whenever the fear surged, he countered it by recalling Alex's embrace and the fierce promise in his voice, "You're safe." Eventually, cocooned in warmth and utterly exhausted, Ethan drifted into a heavy sleep. He dreamed of curious things, of wolves standing guard in the dark, of a strong hand clasping his as they ran through a maze, of a tiny heartbeat echoing softly within him. Through it all, a figure stayed by his side, tall, protective, cloaked in shadow, but with eyes that glowed like silver. When he woke once in the middle of the night, disoriented in the unfamiliar room, he almost expected to see Alex watching over him. He felt an odd pang at his absence but soothed himself with the reality that the Alpha was just down the hall, a call away. As dawn's first light filtered into the room, Ethan realized this was the first morning of his new life, one where he lived under the protection of a Mafia boss and carried his unborn child. It sounded like something out of the novels he would read at that bookstore. Except this was real, and his heart was already entangled in ways he couldn't yet understand. Over the next several weeks, Ethan's life took on a surreal new rhythm. He remained ensconced in Alex's penthouse, which effectively became both his refuge and his gilded cage. Alex insisted he treat it as his home, and indeed, he provided every comfort, a closet of maternity clothes that appeared as if by magic as Ethan's waist began to thicken, a private doctor who made discreet house calls to check on him and the baby's progress, even a makeshift office set up so Ethan could attempt to work remotely. The world beyond those secure walls faded into a hazy memory. Ethan ventured out only for critical doctor's appointments and always under heavy guard. He spoke to his mother and brother by phone, crafting half-truths about a high-risk pregnancy that required bed rest. He hated lying, but the fantastical truth was impossible. His best friend Mia was harder to fool. She sensed something was off, but Ethan promised to explain everything eventually. How could he possibly tell his normal, sweet friend that he was essentially living with the mob? Despite the circumstances, those days were not unhappy. In fact, some were almost peaceful, even sweet in their own way. As the initial shock and fear ebbed, a daily routine emerged in which Alex was a steady fixture. Most mornings, the Alpha joined Ethan for breakfast at a sunny nook overlooking the city. At first, their conversations were tentative and polite. Ethan thanked him often for all he was doing, and Alex waved it off, reminding him it was necessary and that he wanted to. But gradually, formality gave way to genuine connection. Ethan learned that Alex liked his coffee strong and black and that he had a weakness for blueberry pancakes, though he'd never admitted it aloud. One of the chefs spilled that secret. Alex learned that Ethan needed ginger tea to help his morning nausea and that he had an affinity for classical piano music when he felt anxious. One day, Ethan mentioned offhand that as a child he'd played the piano but hadn't touched one in years. The next day, a beautiful keyboard appeared in the living room, with Alex casually saying he thought music might help pass the time. Moments like that left Ethan both charmed and unsettled by the ease with which Alex could make things happen. The Alpha seemed determined to anticipate his every need, which was endearing, but it also meant they spent a lot of time together, more than Ethan had expected. He'd thought a man as powerful as Alex would be constantly out managing his empire, but Alex reassured him he could handle much of it from home for now, given the circumstances. And perhaps, a small voice in Ethan's head suggested, he wants to be near. Their relationship, if he could call it that, was a delicate dance of unspoken boundaries and slowly eroding walls. Alex was ever the gentleman, never pushing physical closeness beyond a guiding hand on Ethan's back or the occasional brush of his fingers against Ethan's when he handed him something. Yet Ethan found himself watching Alex when he wasn't looking, the way his brow furrowed in concentration during a chess game they played to while away an evening, or the rare boyish grin that escaped when Ethan teased him for underestimating his game strategy. Each day, Ethan's comfort with Alex grew, and so did an undercurrent of attraction he tried to ignore. He told himself it was just the proximity, the forced intimacy of their situation. But deep down, he knew it was more. One crisp afternoon, as October leaves swirled outside, Alex returned from a meeting with his security team with grim news. He found Ethan curled up on the sofa with a book, one hand resting unconsciously on the slight swell of his belly, a sight that made something warm flutter in Alex's chest. He almost hated to disturb the peace in Ethan's expression. "Ethan," he began gently, taking a seat across from him. Ethan looked up immediately, reading the seriousness in his features and closing his book. "What is it?" Alex clasped his hands, a gesture Ethan recognized as him measuring his words. "We have new intelligence on Petrov," he said. "He's gone to ground, but we think he's regrouping for another attempt." Ethan's stomach clenched. Though the past weeks had been quiet, he lived with the underlying awareness that Petrov was still out there, still a threat. "Okay," he said softly. "What does that mean for us?" Alex's eyes softened at his inclusion of us, but his tone stayed factual. "It means I have to take proactive measures. I won't wait for him to strike again. I have allies in the city, other families who also want Petrov contained. We're coordinating." There was a fierceness to Alex as he discussed strategy that both scared and reassured Ethan. "Coordinating, as in war?" he asked hesitantly. Alex sighed, rubbing his chin. Hopefully it won't come to open conflict. If we can corner him quietly and enforce a truce, or remove him, that would be ideal. He didn't elaborate on remove, but Ethan understood. He swallowed, nodding. Violence as a solution still made him uneasy, but when he thought of that knife at his ribs, his empathy for Petrov's fate dwindled. Alex leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs. However, until this is resolved, I need to tighten security even more. I think it's time to move you to my estate outside the city. He raised a hand to preempt Ethan's protest, though Ethan hadn't even decided if he'd object. You'll be far safer there than in Manhattan. It's more isolated and fortified. I have a private airfield to move at a moment's notice and an army of guards patrolling the perimeter. Ethan absorbed this. He had grown somewhat comfortable here. It was luxurious, yes, but also confined. Yet at least it was in the city he knew. Moving to Alex's estate felt more permanent, more intimate, even if logically it made sense. When were you thinking of going? Ethan asked. Alex's lips quirked in a half-smile at his practical response. As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if you're up for it. Ethan appreciated that he phrased it as his choice, though he suspected Alex would insist if he declined. But he wasn't going to decline. All right, Ethan agreed. Tomorrow. Relief touched Alex's features. Thank you for trusting me on this. Ethan attempted a light grin. You're kind of hard to say no to, you know. Alex raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Ethan blushed slightly and changed the subject. Your estate, it's in the country. Upstate. On a lake. It's secluded. I think you might like it, actually, it's quieter than here. Fresh air. Lots of space. Ethan noted a trace of something in his tone, like he truly hoped Ethan would like it. It sounds nice, Ethan admitted. I haven't been outside the city in a long time. Alex nodded, and an easy silence settled as they both contemplated the move. Ethan realized he didn't even have that much to pack. He'd left his old apartment weeks ago with just an overnight bag, never imagining he wouldn't return. Alex had already sent some of his staff to retrieve personal items from Ethan's apartment, another violation of normalcy, hearing that his people rifled through his things. But they'd brought back his favorite pillow and photo albums, which made Ethan forgive the intrusion. As he looked at Alex, his profile strong against the late afternoon light, Ethan thought of all he'd done and sacrificed to keep him safe so far. The Alpha had appended his own routines, possibly risked his standing by appearing vulnerable to his enemies, and all for someone who had been a stranger not long ago. Alex, Ethan said suddenly, making the Alpha turn to him. Why are you doing all this? Alex frowned slightly. We've been over this. It's for the babies. No, I know. Ethan interrupted gently. I mean, you could have handled this very differently. You could have paid me off, or had me hidden away in some secure location with guards rather than staying by my side. But you're here with me. You're making sure I'm all right at every turn. Why? His heart pounded in the silence that followed. It was a bold question, one he had held in for a while. Alex's face was unusually vulnerable as he considered his answer. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline before speaking. I asked myself the same early on, he said quietly. Initially, it was simple duty. My responsibility. But somewhere along the line. He trailed off, then turned to meet Ethan's gaze, his steel-gray eyes softer than Ethan had ever seen. Somewhere along the line, it became more than that. I found that protecting you, caring for you, I wanted to do it. Not just because of the baby, but because it's you. I can't fully explain it, Ethan. Perhaps it's been the circumstances forcing us together, or perhaps. He took a slow breath. Perhaps it's that in you, I see someone I've been searching for without knowing it. Ethan's breath caught. The room seemed to go very still. He rose to his feet, their eyes locked. Alex, he whispered, unsure what to say. His cheeks felt warm and his heart thudded. In you, I see someone I've been searching for. The words resonated through him, at once exhilarating and terrifying. Alex stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Ethan's. There was a gravity between them, an almost magnetic pull that had been growing day by day and now felt impossible to ignore. When Alex raised a hand, he did it slowly, giving Ethan time to move away. He didn't. Alex's fingers grazed Ethan's cheek, tucking a loose strand of hair behind his ear. Tell me to stop, and I will, he murmured. Ethan's voice wavered as he replied, I don't want you to stop. A quiet sound escaped Alex, something like relief, maybe even joy. He tilted Ethan's chin up gently and lowered his head. Ethan's eyes fluttered closed just as Alex's lips met his. The kiss was soft, cautious at first, as if Alex was afraid Ethan might break. But when Ethan sighed against him and leaned in, his hands resting against Alex's chest for balance, Alex's arm encircled his waist and drew him closer. The kiss deepened, warmth blooming in Ethan's chest and spreading outward like the first rays of sunrise breaking a long night. He felt safe and alive all at once in Alex's embrace. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Alex rested his forehead against Ethan's. His hand splayed protectively across the small of Ethan's back, and it made Ethan realize he was subtly supporting his weight, mindful of his condition as always. Ethan opened his eyes to find Alex watching him with such open affection that it nearly stole his breath again. I didn't expect that, Ethan whispered with a shy smile. Alex's lips curved. Neither did I, if I'm honest. But I have no regrets. He brushed the pad of his thumb over Ethan's lower lip, the gesture intimate and reverent. You are extraordinary, Ethan. How you've handled everything, your strength, your kindness, it's no wonder. He stopped, a rare uncertainty crossing his features. No wonder what? Ethan prompted gently, covering Alex's hand with his own. Alex hesitated only a second. No wonder I'm falling in love with you. The words were spoken quietly, but they hung in the air, electrifying. Ethan felt a joyous swell in his chest that left him almost dizzy. He hadn't let himself name his own feelings, not yet, but hearing Alex's sparked an answering flame. Alex, he murmured, eyes shining. A sudden rap on the door interrupted them, followed by Marco's apologetic voice, Boss, sorry, but there's an urgent call. Alex closed his eyes for a brief second, collecting himself. I'll be right there, he replied, not taking his eyes off Ethan. He searched his face as if to make sure this moment was real and mutual. Ethan responded by standing on tiptoe and pressing a swift, reassuring kiss to Alex's lips, the boldness of it making them both smile. We'll continue this later, he said softly. Alex's answering look promised that they would. He left to handle the call, and Ethan sank back onto the couch, fingers lightly touching his lips. His world felt like it had shifted on its axis yet again, but this time, in a wonderful way. He loves me. The thought sent butterflies through him, and the realization that he was very much on the path to loving Alex back settled warmly in his heart. However, the tender moment was soon overshadowed. That urgent call turned out to be news that forced Alex's hand quicker than anticipated. Petrov had made a move, a violent confrontation with one of Alex's allied families at a warehouse by the docks. There were casualties, and Petrov slipped away once more. The war was no longer cold. It had ignited. By nightfall, Alex's estate upstate was readied, and they decided to depart at first light. The evening was a flurry of activity, security teams organizing transport, additional guards arriving. Alex was on calls for hours, his demeanor shifting fully into the ruthless leader mode that Ethan had only glimpsed before. Watching him give orders in rapid Italian and terse English, Ethan was reminded just how powerful and dangerous he could be. Yet when he caught Ethan watching, Alex offered a gentle nod or a quick squeeze of his hand in passing, silently apologizing for neglecting him in the chaos. Late that night, Ethan struggled to sleep, anxious about what lay ahead. He finally gave up and wandered out of his suite, drawn to a dim light coming from Alex's office. The door was slightly ajar. He peeked in to find Alex sitting at his desk, elbows on the polished wood and head in his hands. He looked weary, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily. Ethan knocked softly on the doorframe. Alex's head snapped up, eyes alert until he saw it was Ethan. Some tension eased from his face, replaced by concern. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice low. Ethan stepped inside. "Too much on my mind." "What about you?" He gestured to Alex, who certainly wasn't sleeping either. Alex managed a small smile. "Too much on my mind," he echoed. He extended a hand, and Ethan went to him, letting Alex draw him into his lap. It was a mark of how natural their closeness had become that Ethan didn't hesitate. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Ethan resting his head against Alex's shoulder as the alpha softly stroked his arm. Despite the worries swirling around them, Ethan felt content in that little oasis of calm. After a while, Alex murmured, "We'll leave early and get you far away from this volatility. Once you're safe, I can focus on ending this." Ethan frowned, lifting his head. "Ending this with Petrov?" Alex nodded, jaw tightening. "I won't have him menace our family." Ethan's heart skipped at "our family." Alex said it so naturally. But another part of his statement nagged at him. "When you say, 'I can focus,' do you mean I won't see you for a while?" Alex hesitated, and Ethan saw the answer in his eyes. "It might be safer if I handle things directly. I don't want to draw any fire towards the estate." Ethan sat up straighter in his lap, anxiety rising. "So you plan to drop me off at a safe house and go to war, essentially?" Alex's brow creased. "It won't be as dramatic as that, hopefully. But yes, I may need to be away for stretches. It's temporary, tesoro. Just until it's finished." Ethan's chest constricted painfully. One part of him understood logically, Alex had to neutralize the threat to ensure a peaceful life for them later. But another part, the part deeply attached to him now, recoiled at the idea of Alex walking into danger while he sat waiting, helpless. He caught Alex's hand, gripping it tightly. "Promise me you'll be careful," he whispered. "Promise me you'll come back." He hated how vulnerable he sounded, but he needed to hear it. Alex's eyes gentled. He cupped Ethan's face in both hands. "I swear to you, I'll do everything in my power to come back safe and quickly. I have too much to live for now." His hand drifted down to rest against Ethan's belly, and Ethan covered it with his own, intertwining their fingers over the gentle swell. "We both need you," Ethan said softly. Alex kissed him then, a slow, tender kiss that conveyed both reassurance and longing. When they parted, he brushed away a tear Ethan hadn't realized had escaped. "Try to rest," Alex murmured. "We have an early start." Reluctantly, Ethan returned to his suite. That night, sleep was fitful. He dreamed of thunder and lightning crashing over a dark lake, of searching for Alex in a storm and finding only shadows. When he woke before dawn, he found himself already dressed and ready to leave, nerves jangling. The transition to the estate was swift and efficient. Alex, Ethan, and a convoy of security vehicles left Manhattan as the sun was rising, slipping out under the cover of relative quiet. Alex insisted Ethan ride with him in a discreet SUV rather than his more conspicuous town car. The journey upstate took a couple of hours. Alex remained tense and vigilant throughout, one hand never far from Ethan's. Ethan watched the cityscape give way to rolling autumn-colored hills, his heart heavy with a mix of hope and dread. The Moretti estate turned out to be breathtaking, 17 acres of private woodland on the edge of a crystal-clear lake, with a grand stone manor that looked like something out of the 1920s, as Alex later explained, it indeed was, lovingly restored. As they passed through wrought iron gates, Ethan gaped at the expanse of nature, tall oaks and maples shedding russet leaves, manicured gardens blending into wild meadow, and the lake shimmering beyond with a boathouse at its shore. It was hard to imagine anything bad ever penetrating such a serene haven. Inside, the manor was luxurious yet surprisingly warm in decor. Alex led him through an impressive foyer with a sweeping staircase to the second floor, where Ethan's new quarters awaited. "I thought you'd like this room," Alex said, pushing open double doors to a suite with a breathtaking view of the lake. The space was beautifully furnished, a canopied bed, a fireplace, French doors opening to a balcony. Despite his inner turmoil, Ethan couldn't help but smile. "It's amazing." He turned to Alex. "Thank you." Alex seemed pleased that he liked it. "My room is just down the hall," he mentioned casually. "And your friend Mia will be arriving tomorrow." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Mia? Really?" He had tearfully told Mia a modified version of events the night before, that he was pregnant by a donor mix-up, there had been some threats, and he was going to a safe location looked after by the father, who turned out to be a good man. Mia had been shocked but supportive. Ethan had wanted to see her but didn't think it possible. Alex nodded. "I thought having someone familiar around might help you feel more at home. We can trust him, right?" He raised an eyebrow slightly, since Mia knowing anything was technically a security risk. Ethan nearly threw his arms around him. "Yes, absolutely. He would never betray my trust." "Oh, Alex, thank you." Alex smiled and brushed a kiss on his forehead. "I need to step out to coordinate with security," he said reluctantly. "Marco will be with you. I'll find you for lunch." Ethan nodded, watching him go with a pang. Alex had done so much to make him comfortable, and now likely would plunge himself into deadly work. He vowed to do whatever he could on his end to make this ordeal end quickly too, even if that meant simply taking care of himself and not adding to Alex's worries. True to his word, Alex was largely away from the house or holed up in his office over the next week. Mia's arrival was a joyful distraction. When his friend burst into the foyer and pulled Ethan into a tight hug, both of them crying, it felt like a piece of his old life had been returned. Of course, Mia was wide-eyed at the palatial estate and the army of staff and guards. "Dude, what have you landed in?" he whispered in amazement as they toured the gardens. Ethan could only laugh helplessly and say, "It's a long story." In private, he confessed more of the truth, who Alex really was, what danger lurked. Mia took it remarkably well. "It's like one of those wild novels you read," he said, and promised to stay as long as needed. Having Mia there provided a sense of normality. They baked cookies in the gourmet kitchen under the amused gaze of the head chef, took walks by the lake with 2 security shadows in tow, and Mia even got Ethan to play piano again in the manor's old study room. Mia also witnessed firsthand the tender dynamic between Ethan and Alex. One evening, when Alex returned earlier than expected, he found the 2 friends laughing in the den over an old movie. He paused to greet Mia politely. He later admitted to Ethan he nearly swooned at Alex's movie star looks and old-world manners, then fixed his attention on Ethan, tucking a lock of hair behind his ear and asking softly if he'd eaten dinner and how he was feeling. Mia observed the whole exchange with a knowing smirk. Later that night, as they prepared for bed like teenagers at a sleepover, he nudged Ethan. "Spill. You two are completely smitten, aren't you?" Ethan felt heat creep to his cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" he murmured, fiddling with his hairbrush. Mia rolled his eyes playfully. Only to someone with eyeballs. The way he looks at you, intense. And you light up when he's around, even when you're exhausted. Ethan couldn't hide his smile. I really have fallen for him, Mia. It's crazy and unexpected, but I love him. Saying it aloud to his friend felt like releasing a secret butterfly into the air. And he said he loves me too. Mia clasped his hands in delight. That's the best thing I've heard all year. I mean, it's insane given how it started, but honestly, sometimes the wildest stories make the best ones. He grew more serious then. Do you see a future with him? Like, really with him? Because his world, it's not easy. Ethan looked out the window at the moonlit lake. I do, he answered quietly. I know there are dangers and challenges, but Alex has shown me parts of himself no one else sees. He's protective, yes, but also gentle and good to me. And he's going to be a wonderful father. He smiled softly, thinking of how Alex had taken to reading parenting books at night, something Ethan caught him doing when he peeked in his office one time, much to Alex's sheepish embarrassment. Mia squeezed his hand. Then I'm thrilled for you. It's not the life we once imagined, but if you're happy, I'm with you all the way. The only dark cloud in those days was the looming confrontation with Petrov. Alex kept most details from Ethan, not wanting to worry him, but Ethan gleaned bits from hushed conversations and the grave faces of Marco and others. Petrov had gone underground and was proving elusive, and in the meantime, threats continued in the city, a skirmish here, a bomb scare there. Alex was stretched thin, managing an evolving gang war while trying to ensure the estate remained off the radar. One night, a storm lashed the lake with wind and rain. Ethan awoke past midnight to find the space beside him in bed empty, not that Alex slept there, they hadn't shared a bed yet, as Alex was being old-fashioned and taking it slow, but he somehow expected the alpha to be there on such a wild night. Troubled by a sense of foreboding, Ethan slipped out of his room and padded down the hall. A sliver of light shone under Alex's office door. Quietly, he peeked in. Alex stood by the window, phone to his ear, his face illuminated intermittently by lightning. No, keep him out of this. Do whatever it takes, but I will not have him involved, Alex was saying fiercely. Ethan's heart skipped. Was he talking about him? He listened guiltily. I don't care if it draws him out faster. I said no, Alex snapped, then let out an exasperated breath. Because I won't risk his life as bait, that's why. There's no negotiation on this. Ethan felt a chill. Someone must have suggested using him to lure Petrov. He shouldn't have been surprised, he was the prize in the enemy's eyes. But Alex's protective refusal both relieved and alarmed him, because it meant finding Petrov was harder without that leverage. Alex went silent as the person on the line argued back. Finally, he practically growled, find another way. You have 48 hours. He ended the call, tossing the phone on his desk with a curse. In that moment, a crack of thunder boomed and the lights flickered. Alex glanced up and saw Ethan hovering at the door. His expression softened immediately. Ethan, you should be asleep, he said, concern lacing his tone as he came toward him. Is everything all right? Ethan stepped in, wrapping his arms around himself and nodding. I woke up and... He searched Alex's tired face. And I missed you. It was partly true. He also didn't want Alex stewing alone. Without a word, Alex opened his arms, and Ethan went into them gladly. He held him close, resting his chin atop Ethan's head. Ethan felt some of the tension leave Alex's body as they stood together listening to the rain lash the windows. Are you all right? Ethan whispered. Alex sighed. Better now. Pulling back slightly, he traced a finger along Ethan's cheek. I'm sorry if I woke you. Things have been complicated. Ethan wanted to say he didn't have to apologize, but instead he mustered his courage. Let me in, Alex. Please don't carry it all yourself. Alex's eyes searched his, conflict evident. I just want you to be safe and not worry more than you already do. I worry more when I'm left in the dark, Ethan countered gently. I know I can't fight your battles, but I can at least carry some of the fear with you. Alex closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. He led Ethan to the leather couch, and they sat, still holding each other, quietly as the storm raged outside. He told him what weighed on him. Petrov's forcing my hand. We have intel he might try something drastic soon. My allies think if we dangle what he wants, we could draw him out into a trap. His jaw clenched. They want to use you as that bait, leak word of your location, set a false security lapse, then snare him. Ethan inhaled sharply. That's incredibly risky. I refused, Alex said immediately, voice low and fierce. I will not put you in harm's way like that, not when we can find another way. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you. Emotion tightened Ethan's throat. But if he's never drawn out, does that mean you'll always be fighting from the shadows? Always looking over our shoulders? Alex's silence was answer enough. That future was unacceptable, they both knew it. Ethan realized with a mix of fear and resolve that perhaps he had to do something after all. He took Alex's hand, lacing their fingers. Hypothetically, if you did go with their plan, do you think it would work? Would Petrov come? Alex looked at him sharply. We're not entertaining that, Ethan. I'm just asking, Ethan said, squeezing his hand. Would he take the bait? Alex hesitated, then relented, because he could see Ethan would think on it regardless. Likely yes. That man is obsessed with not leaving loose ends or being bested. If he thought he had a shot at grabbing you, he'd make a move. His eyes flashed anger at the mere idea. But it's too dangerous. Even if we had a controlled setup, too much can go wrong. I nearly lost you once. I won't risk it again. Ethan's free hand rested on his belly. A fierce protective instinct warred with his desire to end this threat once and for all. Could he risk himself, and by extension, the baby? But he'd have Alex's forces protecting them during the trap, presumably. And if it succeeded, the baby's future would be secure. What if we made it safer? Ethan found himself saying slowly. Like, double layers of protection, backup plans. I wouldn't be alone. I'd be guarded but visibly present to lure him. Alex was already shaking his head. Ethan, no. I understand your bravery, but no. Ethan turned toward him, taking Alex's face in his hands so he had to see his determination. I don't want to live in fear, Alex. I don't want our child to live in a fortress forever. If drawing Petrov out means this ends, maybe it's worth the risk. His voice trembled on the last part, because God, the risk terrified him. But he remembered his own thought from weeks ago, I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, little one. This was an extension of that promise. Facing danger now to ensure a safer tomorrow. Alex grasped his wrists gently, removing Ethan's hands from his face to kiss his palms one by one. You are the bravest Omega I've ever met, he murmured, eyes glistening with emotion. And the most precious thing in the world to me. That's why I can't agree to this. I know you want to help end it, but if something went wrong. His voice broke slightly. I couldn't live. Neither could our baby, likely. It's not just about you, it's about them too. He placed a hand reverently on Ethan's abdomen. Ethan's resolve wavered at that. Alex was right. It wasn't just his life, it was their child's too. He felt tears slip down his cheeks, frustrated and scared and touched by how deeply Alex cared. He leaned into him, and Alex enveloped him in a protective embrace. "We'll find another way," Alex whispered into his hair. "I swear it." They stayed like that for a long time, comforted by each other's presence. Eventually, Alex coaxed Ethan back to bed, even though he himself wouldn't sleep. "Just rest, my love," he urged as he tucked him in back in his room, Mia softly snoring in the adjacent suite, oblivious to the drama. "I'll be here when you wake." He kissed Ethan's forehead as Ethan closed his eyes. Ethan did fall asleep again, exhausted by the emotional storm. In the morning, Alex was indeed there, but only briefly. Just long enough to assure Ethan that plans were afoot and he shouldn't worry. "Try to have a peaceful day with Mia," he said over breakfast, brushing a kiss to Ethan's knuckles. "You'll be safe here. I have to step out for a meeting, but Marco and 10 others will be on the grounds." Ethan hated how formal he sounded, like he was already mentally in battle. But he mustered a smile and squeezed his hand. "Be careful," he reminded, his brown eyes conveying everything he felt. "Come back to me." Alex nodded, understanding. "Always." That afternoon crawled by. Mia could sense something was off and tried to lighten the mood with a silly board game and making ice cream sundaes in the kitchen. Ethan appreciated it but remained preoccupied, glancing at the clock, waiting for Alex to return. He didn't. Instead, near dusk, Marco found Ethan and Mia sitting in the parlor and informed them that Mr. Moretti was delayed and had recommended they have dinner without him. Ethan's heart sank. Delayed could mean many things. He attempted to eat the meal the staff prepared, but his appetite had fled. With Mia's encouragement, he went upstairs to rest, feeling an unnameable dread creeping in as night fell and still no word from Alex. Close to midnight, a sudden commotion downstairs jolted him from a half-sleep, raised voices, the sound of doors slamming. Ethan threw on a robe and hurried out just as Mia emerged from his room, looking frightened. "Stay here," Marco's voice commanded at the base of the stairs. Ethan rushed to the railing. "Marco, what's happened?" he called, anxiety sharpening his tone. The man looked up, his normally stoic face betraying strain. "There's been an incident, Mr. Kohl," he said carefully. "Alex, Mr. Moretti, was injured. He's being brought here." The world tilted. Ethan gripped the railing. "Injured? How bad?" His voice was barely audible. Before Marco could answer, the front door burst open and a group of men entered carrying a stretcher. On it lay Alex, pale and unconscious, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his side. Ethan's breath left him in a sob. He flew down the stairs, Mia on his heels. "Alex!" He dropped to his knees beside the stretcher as they placed it down in the foyer. One of Alex's men was pressing a cloth to his side, it was soaked crimson. Alex's face was ashen, but to Ethan's relief, he moaned softly. "Alive. Barely." A stern-looking older alpha with a medical bag pushed through, Dr. Galletti, Alex's personal physician. "Clear the way. Let's get him to the study," he barked. The study was on the ground floor, nearest and outfitted with first aid supplies. Ethan knew. He followed closely as they lifted Alex onto a sofa in the study, ignoring anyone who tried to pull him back. Dr. Galletti immediately set to work, barking for 4 fluids and more light. Ethan knelt at Alex's head, gently brushing his sweat-dampened hair back. "I'm here, Alex," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Please hang on." Alex's eyes flickered open at his voice, glazed with pain. "Ethan." He rasped, one blood-stained hand weakly finding Ethan's. "You're safe." "Good." Ethan choked back a sob. "Don't you dare worry about me right now," he said, trying to smile through tears. "You'll be okay, you hear me? You have to be. Because I love you and I need you. His voice broke on a hiccuped cry. Alex gave a faint ghost of a smile and squeezed his hand, which terrified Ethan because it felt so feeble. Love you, he managed before drifting off again with a grimace. As the doctor began cleaning the wound, Ethan felt Mia's comforting presence behind him, a hand rubbing his back. He'll be okay, Ethan. He's in good hands, he said, though his voice trembled. Marco quietly explained what had happened, an ambush at a supposed meeting location, a trap by Petrov. There was a firefight and Alex took a bullet to the side, but his men got him out. And Petrov? He escaped yet again. The despair of that news nearly crushed Ethan. This, all for nothing, and Alex gravely hurt. For the next hour, Ethan refused to leave the study, watching with held breath as Dr. Galletti and a medic performed minor surgery to extract the bullet and suture the wound. They gave Alex blood transfusions and monitored his vitals. Finally, nearing dawn, the doctor looked up and gave a tired nod. He'll live, Mr. Kohl. He'll be fine with rest. The bullet missed major organs, fortunately. Ethan broke into relieved tears, covering his face briefly. When he regained composure, he found the doctor smiling kindly. He kept mumbling your name whenever he was semi-conscious. You seem to have an effect on him. Good, use that to keep him calm when he wakes. As they carefully moved Alex to a proper bed, a guest room on the ground floor to avoid stairs for now, Ethan was allowed to stay by his side. Mia squeezed his shoulder and withdrew to give them privacy after confirming Ethan was okay. Ethan sat vigil at Alex's bedside, holding his hand through the morning as his anesthesia wore off. Exhaustion weighed on him, but he didn't close his eyes until he saw Alex's flutter open around noon. Alex looked disoriented until he saw Ethan. Ethan, he croaked, trying to sit up with a wince. Ethan immediately pressed him gently back down. Shoo, I'm here. You need to lie still. He managed a shaky smile. You scared me half to death, you know. Alex exhaled, some tension leaving him at Ethan's presence. Sorry, he whispered. His free hand drifted to Ethan's abdomen, checking. You, baby, all right? Ethan laughed softly through tears. We're fine. We were safe, like you wanted. He brought Alex's hand to his lips and kissed it. Now focus on getting better. Please. Alex's eyes welled unexpectedly. I thought I wouldn't see you again, he confessed haltingly. All I could think of was you. Ethan leaned over and kissed him tenderly, brushing his hair back. You're stuck with me, Alessandro Moretti. I'm not going anywhere. The days that followed were a slow recovery for Alex. He chafed at being bedridden, but Ethan rather enjoyed fussing over him for once, making sure he ate the bland soups the doctor ordered, reading aloud newspaper snippets to keep him entertained, and carefully omitting any alarming news. Mia proved an invaluable source of levity, quipping that a bullet wound was one way to get a vacation. Alex even chuckled at that, which made Ethan's heart soar hearing that sound again. While Alex healed, his men continued the hunt for Petrov. Ethan overheard that the failed ambush had at least narrowed Petrov's hiding spot. It seemed the climax was nearing. He felt a strange calm. The worst had happened, nearly losing Alex, and somehow they got through it. On a crisp morning 2 weeks later, Ethan was helping Alex slowly walk a few steps in the garden, doctor-approved light exercise, when Marco came briskly toward them, face triumphant. We got him, he announced simply. Petrov is finished. Alex halted, gripping Ethan's arm for support as much from the news as the exertion. Dead? He asked. Marco nodded. Cornered last night in Chicago. It's confirmed. For a long moment, Alex closed his eyes, breathing out years of tension. Ethan saw a visible weight lift off him. It was over. The nightmare that had bound them was finally over. Ethan let out a little sob of joy and threw his arms carefully around Alex. "We're free," he whispered. Alex held him close, burying his face in Ethan's hair. "Free," he repeated, amazement and relief coloring the word. Marco discreetly left, leaving the two to absorb the moment. Alex pulled back just enough to cup Ethan's face, his eyes shining. "Now we can truly start anew," he said softly. Ethan nodded, tears rolling. Alex kissed them away one by one, then captured his lips in a loving kiss under the bright autumn sky. In the weeks that followed Petrov's demise, life took on a golden hue of hope for Ethan and Alex. They returned to Manhattan only to finalize a few things, including Ethan's resignation from his job, with a generous thank you bonus courtesy of Alex, and the sale of his old apartment. There was nothing there for him now. His life was firmly entwined with Alex's. They decided to make the estate their primary home, at least for the foreseeable future. Ethan found he loved the tranquility and beauty of it, and Alex was more at ease knowing layers of security were naturally in place for his family. Mia stayed long enough to be introduced to one of Alex's charming cousins, and sparks flew. Ethan had a feeling his friend would be visiting often. Late November arrived, and with it, the first dusting of snow on the pines around the lake. Alex had recovered well enough to resume light work, to his relief, and he and Ethan fell into a gentle routine of preparing for their baby's arrival. They turned one of the manor's sunny rooms into a nursery, painting the walls a pale yellow and filling it with furniture Alex's enthusiastic sisters sent as gifts. One evening, after a quiet dinner by the fireplace, Alex led Ethan by the hand to the library. "I have something for you," he said mysteriously. Ethan laughed as Alex made him cover his eyes while he positioned him. "Okay, open." Ethan gasped. Before him, the once empty corner of the library now housed a small bookshop-like nook, shelves lined with new copies of his favorite novels, a cozy armchair beside an authentic vintage bookstore sign that read Ethan's Nook. "Alex, did you build this for me?" Ethan asked, his voice watery with emotion. Alex shrugged with a playful smile. "I know how much you loved your bookstore visits. I thought, why not have one here at home?" His tone turned earnest. "You gave up a lot to join my world. I wanted to give a piece of yours back to you." Ethan threw his arms around him, joyful tears spilling. "It's perfect. You are unbelievable." He pulled back to look at Alex with all the love he felt. "Thank you." Alex brushed a kiss to his nose. "Only the best for you. Always." They settled into the armchair together, or rather, Alex settled and then pulled Ethan onto his lap, despite his protests about his protruding belly. Alex cradled him and the baby bump with care. "Comfortable?" he murmured against Ethan's ear. Ethan nodded, sighing contentedly. "I have everything I need right here." Alex nuzzled his neck. "As do I." Their mating ceremony, when it happened just before Christmas, was a small, intimate affair at the estate, attended by family and a few close friends. Mia, of course, as best man. Ethan walked down an aisle improvised in the snow-dusted garden, wearing an ivory tunic that flowed around his 7-month belly, toward Alex, who waited under a canopy of twinkling lights. The alpha looked devastatingly handsome and profoundly moved. Ethan had never seen his eyes shine with such tears. When they exchanged vows, Alex's voice wavered as he promised to love and protect Ethan for all his days, to be his shield and his sanctuary. Ethan vowed to stand by Alex through any storm, to be his light as he had been his. As they sealed their union with a tender, lingering kiss, a claiming bite gentle on Ethan's neck, marking him as Alex's and Alex as his, applause and cheers rang through the crisp winter air. Ethan felt the baby give a little kick, as if in approval, and he laughed against Alex's lips, whispering the news to him. Alex's face lit up in wonder. It was an auspicious blessing indeed. That night, cuddled together by the fireplace with hot cocoa in hand, they reflected on the whirlwind that had brought them there. Who would have thought a routine checkup would lead to this? Ethan mused, leaning his head on his alpha's shoulder. The firelight danced in his eyes. Alex chuckled. Fate works mysteriously. What began as a mistake turned into the greatest fortune of my life. He kissed the top of Ethan's head. You and our child, you're everything to me. Ethan smiled up at him, heart full. And you are everything to us. He guided Alex's hand to his belly, where a tiny flutter indicated their daughter, they had learned it was a girl, to Alex's utter delight, was active. Alex already had visions of a dark-haired little princess to spoil. As the first snowflakes of Christmas began to drift outside, Alex pulled Ethan closer on the sofa, wrapping an arm securely around him and resting a hand on his stomach to feel their baby's gentle movements. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow and the crackling fire, each lost in gratitude. Ethan's mind drifted to the journey behind and the future ahead. So much had happened, heartbreak, fear, danger, but it all led to this moment of peace and profound happiness. He thought of that scared, confused Omega he'd been months ago and wished he could tell him then, hold on. Because something beautiful is on the other side of all this. Alex's voice rumbled softly, interrupting his reverie. A penny for your thoughts, mio tesoro. The title still gave Ethan butterflies. He tilted his face up to Alex's. I was just thinking how I wouldn't change a thing. Every twist and turn brought me here with you. Alex's gaze warmed, and he lowered his lips to Ethan's in a gentle kiss. I feel the same, he murmured. You changed my life, Ethan. Gave it meaning I never knew I lacked. They shared a smile, that special smile of two souls who had walked through fire and come out the other side stronger and together. As the evening wore on, Alex fetched a well-worn book of poetry from the shelf, one he'd often read to Ethan on cozy nights. In his deep, soothing voice, he began to recite a verse about love conquering all obstacles. Ethan closed his eyes, snuggling into his alpha's embrace, letting his words wash over him like a soothing melody. The baby gave another content kick, as if soothed too by her father's voice. Ethan realized he had never felt so completely content. The shadows of the past had finally been chased away, leaving only the glow of a bright future. He and Alex had found an extraordinary love in the most unlikely way, and now nothing would ever break the family they had forged through courage, loyalty, and love. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the world in purity and quiet. Inside, Ethan felt warmth radiate from the alpha beside him and the tiny life within him. His eyes drifted to the window, where beyond the glass the estate grounds stretched safe and serene. It struck him that not long ago, he had stood in a similar window in Alex's penthouse, wondering if this place could ever be home. Now it was clear, home was not the manor or the city. Home was Alex. Home was the arms that held him and the laughter they shared and the baby they awaited. Tears of happiness pricked his eyes as he looked at Alex's beloved face, calm in the firelight as he read softly. Unable to resist, Ethan leaned up and placed a tender kiss on his jaw mid-sentence. Alex paused, smiling down at him quizzically. What was that for? He asked, brushing a thumb across Ethan's cheek. Ethan beamed, wiping away an errant tear. For everything. For loving me. For this new life. He rested his hand over Alex's heart. I'm just so grateful, Alex. Alex's eyes shone as he set the book aside and cradled Ethan's face between his palms. No, my love, thank you. You brought light and hope into my world. You made me a better alpha. And you've given me the family I never dared dream of. Their lips met in a slow, sweet kiss that spoke of all the gratitude, love, and promise their words couldn't capture. When they parted, Alex rested his forehead against Ethan's. Merry Christmas, caro mio, he whispered. And to many, many more. Ethan smiled radiantly, hearing the subtle double meaning, many more Christmases, many more blessings, many more years side by side. Merry Christmas, Alex, he replied softly. Here's to our forever. And as they sat together under the gentle glow of the lights, listening to the peaceful hush of the snow beyond, Ethan knew in his heart that their story, once born of a mistake and forged through trials, had become a tale of enduring love and newfound hope. It was an ending, yes, but also a beautiful beginning. One they would write together, hand in hand, for the rest of their days. The end.